Hello, everybody. We are going to start. Hello. Hola. No se oye nada, ¿no? Hello. Hello. No se oye nada. Hola. ¿Se oye? No sé. ¿Sí? Ya. Voy a poner los dos micros, a ver si así se oye mejor. So, please take your seats. We are going to start. First of all, apologizes, of course, for the room change. You know that it was due to a technical problem with the other room, but I want to thank the services and especially my team in order that they made the transition to this room quite quickly. And this room is very nice. And it's really lovely seeing it so full. It means that the event that we are going to have today raises a lot of attention. And of course, I think it's mainly due to our high-level speaker, which I want to thank especially, our first Executive Vice President of the Commission, Teresa Ribera. Thank you so much for being here. And I also want to thank Nacho Torreblanca, which we are co-organizing this event with ECFR. Thank you as well for the initiative, the impulse and the leadership. And also all the speakers that are participating, several MEPs here that we are having, but especially Kim, Christel, Sandro Gozzi later, Mark Angel, also Adnan, Leire, Idoia. Thank you so much for being here. It means that we are trying to look to this issue from, maybe a more broader perspective than from one political group. We are working with the center pro-European forces of this House with this important topic, which I think it's very relevant, and also to other speakers, key experts and stakeholders that are today here. And we are also having streamline with YouTube, so I'm sure that we will have some other people following this event online. With that, and also thanks to my team, I want to start this event trying to explain what is digital sovereignty for me. And I wanted to start with an image, the image that we can imagine the internet and the digital world like a huge city where we all live, where there are streets that could be the networks. We have buildings and cars that could be the digital platforms. We have shops, which would be online marketplaces and digital services. And we have also the public spaces where people interact. So in a physical city, of course, we know that there are laws and rights that protect us, such as security, privacy in our homes, or freedom of expression. And therefore, in the digital rights that we are trying to protect are like the laws and rules in the city, but applied in the online world that ensure that no one can enter in our digital home without permission, which would be our data, that we can express ourselves freely without any abuse, and that everyone can have access to basic services without discrimination. In this image, digital sovereignty means making sure that the city itself and the people living in it remain in control of its essential infrastructure, rules, and decision instead of depending entirely on the outside powers or companies. So that we are seeing right now. So with this image, what we as European can do and how can we define the digital sovereignty? So key points very briefly. First of all, we consider it as a key geopolitical element in a global context where threats arise constantly and where the global order after the Second World War seems to be in question or basically threatened. Secondly, it is also a basic component of social and economic development of any state, taking into account economic competitiveness, quality of public services. Security also depends on the adaptation and the progress made in the digital ecosystem. Thirdly, the digital public space is totally related with democracy. And today we see how digital platforms have become public information and communication infrastructure controlled by private actors, and that they control the algorithms, they control what we see, what we consume. And this becomes even more worrying when we see the Eurobarometer data that, especially with the young people, that they consume the information basically through social media. So in this sense, it has also this democratic dimension. And finally, the digital rights and strong digital legislation that upholds them has to have European values. So on this, I would like to ask as well ourselves why European digital sovereignty matters today. And you all know this data because it came from a report from the European Parliament and also from the data from the Commission. EU relies on non-EU countries for over 80% of digital products, services, infrastructures, and intellectual property, mainly, obviously, US and China. And this, it goes without saying, that creates technological dependency that exposes EU's vulnerabilities to systemic risks, reduces our capacity to answer and to have a voice on international context and autonomy, and erodes our sovereignty and the rule of the European digital model. But this goes beyond technological dependency. I think that the concentration of market power today in the hands of a few tech companies, mainly US-based corporations, has increasingly translated into political power and capacity to blackmail our European political model. And we have been seeing that in the last months. The current US administration and major American tech companies have acted in concert to pressure the European Union into weakening, withdrawing, or failing to enforce our digital legislation. The combination of unchecked platform power and economic coercion represents a threat, an existential threat to the European sovereignty and democracy. So what needs to be changed? I would mention 5 points, but I'm sure that our speakers will develop more on that, and especially our Vice President. But basically, first point, nowhere is the human cost of this failure more visible than in the crisis of child safety online. This is why we need to develop a digital model that puts the focus on the protection of people, especially the most vulnerable ones, meaning children. For this, from this Parliament, we have been saying so and voted for several reports, but we will continue. We ask for a strong implementation of the European Digital Rulebook, knowing DSA, AI, and we have several examples on how the European Commission is doing so, with for the last example of the preliminary findings for meta investigation, but many more with X, with TikTok. So, of course, we will continue pushing for that. But secondly, we want new provisions to guarantee a harmonized approach to the protection of minors in the digital space, like a European harmonized minimum digital age and common effective and robust age verification tools. And I think that today is also a good day. Christel Schaldemose is probably going to develop that, but with the announcement of President von der Leyen, that probably there is a growing consensus and probably we will have some kind of European harmonized minimum digital age by summer. We will be looking very closely to that. And also we have had the example of the AI Omnibus, the recent AI Omnibus, and thanks to the push of some member states and groups, we managed to include a prohibition of AI notifiers. So I think it's also important how to advance on this protection of children. And finally, we will have the Digital Fairness Act by the end of this year. And we hope that we'll complete the gaps of the DSA and where essential issues for the protection of users, and especially minors, will be addressed, like algorithm transparency, addictive designs, personalized advertising, or influence marketing. Secondly, we need to build strategic capacity in the critical technologies by investing at the right scale and with real coordination. And on this, we will be also looking forward for the upcoming digital sovereignty package that will be published by the end of this month. And we will be also very attentive and to see how this will affect on AI, cloud, chips, and other open source strategies. Thirdly, we consider that needs to use our own market, our 450 million consumers that we have in Europe, to our advantage. And this is very important, especially using one very key tool, which is the public procurement. You know, public procurement, it represents the 14% of the European GDP. So on this, we need to push and reinforce European industry, European solutions, European companies. And fourthly, we must address also the finance and market structure, because we need that, we consider we need European actors and European startups in order to create our alternatives. We cannot only be at the defensive mode, we need to alternatives. And several experts, and I mentioned Anno Bradford, but some others have been saying that we don't have big European platforms, not because we are not able to make them or because we have too many rules, and this is very important with the deregulation debate, but because we don't have enough financing and investment and for that. So on this, we will, of course, looking forward for the 28 regime and the proposal made by the Commission and how this will help to reduce internal barriers in the internal market and to support the European startups. Finally, of course, we should use our values, our European fundamental values, as guiding principle, because the European digital ecosystem must be built to serve society, to strengthen democracy, and to support economic value with a humanistic approach. This is our defining model in comparison with other areas of the world. With that, I just want to thank you, everybody, and pass the floor to our Executive Vice President, Mrs. Teresa. You have the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Laura, for this very kind invitation, and thanks to you all for taking part of this invitation. Nacho, Laura, you organized this very important and timely discussion. I'm here humbly to learn from you and also to share with you why I think that this matters. I think that your commitment, your engagement along the years on this topic is key, and experience shows to what extent it is very important to remain attentive and to identify the best way forwards. Allow me to start with some examples that you know, but that are important to bear in mind. There are very few powerful platforms that own the digital public sphere. And this means that these very few powerful platforms decide what hundreds of millions of Europeans read, get them inspired to buy, shape the way they form their opinions, or they understand and assess political events and realities. Only 22% of citizens still use news websites as the main source of information. And social media is now the primary, by large, news sources for most of our young co-citizens. The implication for the public debate for democracy in Europe is very clear. And guess what? This means real power. Not only economic or consumption power, it means power. So yes, we count on a very relevant set of regulations that try to help to provide the right answers on how to face this challenge. We count on the Digital Service Act, on the Digital Markets Act, on the AI Act. We count on this as being our shield, and we identify some additional relevant measures to be taken. We will come back to that, and the President was commenting on that today. What we have done in the last 2 years since we adopted with the great support and involvement of the Parliament and the Council, the Digital Service Act and the Digital Markets Act. Well, in December, X received the first DSA fine, 120 million euros. A misleading blue checkmark, a poor ads database, blocked access for researchers, reasons to explain why this infringement of the duties of any gatekeeper deserve this fine. Under the Digital Markets Act, Apple has been fined with 500 million euros for App Store violations, Meta 100 million euros for its payer consent model, And in just over 2 years of application, the Digital Markets Act has begun delivering tangible positive results, making digital markets a little bit more fair, more contestable, or more trustable. But it is still early days. There is more to do for the DMA to reach its full potential. We are learning to do it. We are working with gatekeepers to create a culture of compliance. And we have many cases still ongoing, for example, relating to AI and cloud. So how to read the obligations under the Digital Markets Act to provide the right answers for the expectations, for the needs, to protect well-functioning markets, and that the new challenges, the new incumbents may challenge, the new players may challenge the incumbents. On the DSA, 19 enforcement actions have been taken since May. Many focus on protecting minors online, May 2025, sorry. Our digital framework is working, but we must stand firm and remain focused on delivering its full potential for European citizens, based on the clear mandate that you, together with the Council, gave us, and with the expectations coming not only from the civil society organizations and consumers, but also from a very lively ecosystem of startups and entrepreneurs. It is true that we can identify still challenges and even weakness. For instance, think about the impact of the Amazon Web Services falling down in October 2025. Hospitals, banks not being able to work on a regular basis. Think about on the US imposing visa restrictions and asset freeze of European officials who drafted these laws, including former Commissioner Breton, or civil society. Oh, this may mean something too, no? It's remote control. No, it's a joke. I may
continue, porque al menos se te
continue.
Sí, sí,
Okay.
sí.
We hear you.
Yeah.
So I was saying that think about officials ensuring the adoption of this law, civil society organizations being involved in following, assessing, ensuring the proper implementation of these laws in terms of services protecting rights, contents complying with obligations and the law. Think about what it means. Yes, we have weakness. Yes, we need to think about. Think about the CEO of Anthropic underscoring the fact that there may be new developments that could work on its own with no further human intervention, posing real threats, real risk to our day-to-day life. Think about the use it may provide if it is played by wrong hands. Let's say it in a very open manner. Yes, we cannot normalize that. We need to develop our own capacities. We cannot allow someone trying to influence our own decisions, our own values, our own well-functioning economy and services. So what comes next? We need to pay attention to identify gaps, to follow in an open manner our own assessment, the review of the implementation of these regulations in the last 2 years, to identify new horizons and challenges. We can be proud, broadly speaking, of what we have, but it is far from being complete. We have just completed the first review of the DMA, and the conclusion is that the law remains fit for purpose, and we can still tap on its full potential because it has not yet reached its full potential. The review identified 2 areas that need particular attention: artificial intelligence and cloud computing. We have opened market investigations into cloud computing, looking at whether Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure should be designated as gatekeepers. On AI, we have taken a number of recent actions under the DMA. Last month, we advanced to investigations against Google. We are seeking views on draft measures in a first case to ensure that AI chatbots can get access to Google search data on fair and non-discriminatory terms, and in a second case, to ensure that competing AI services can access key features of Google Android devices. And this happens at a very high speed. Either we are able to take action in a very short term, or measures may come too late. Either we keep interoperability and data to access to ensure that the case can be made for new entrepreneurs, or we may block the possibility for this to happen. On AI, the picture remains complex and speed is critical. The field is changing faster in some cases than our rules can follow. When the European Parliament adopted the AI Act in March 2024, most of us had never heard about Grok or notification AI apps. Last week, Parliament and Council agreed on an update to the AI Act that could ban these harmful AI tools. We also need to look ahead and remain alert. The Digital Fairness Act is now planned for this year. It will cover deepfakes, harmful contract terms, and how platforms influence consumer choices, and could be a place for further strengthen the protection of children. Nothing shows what is at stake more clearly than child safety. And there is not much difference between our expectations as European society and the expectations of other societies in other jurisdictions. We have also heard about statements coming from other judicial courts explaining that all these type of behaviors, including the risk of radicalization, exploitation, and abuse of developing dependencies and addictions should be taken into consideration when enforcing the laws. Algorithms are built to maximize engagement. Sometimes that means pushing harmful content to retain attention. And the DSA sets our clear obligations for large platforms for the protection of children. But still, we know that this needs to be enlarged. A few weeks ago, we sent formal charges to Meta accusing it of breaching the Digital Services Act for failing to effectively stop children under 13 from accessing Facebook and Instagram, which is the age limit it set in its own policies. Many EU member states are going further, and so we will, as European Union, through this Digital Fairness Act, including the possibility to count on child safety online and social media age restrictions in Europe, issuing its recommendations on whether legislative action is needed at European level. This brings me to the concept that connects everything we have been discussing today and you will be discussing later on, digital sovereignty. And digital sovereignty may be related to many different aspects. We have been commenting on contents, but there may be other relevant aspects to be taken into consideration. What about the industrial chain or the industrial development? So to reduce this pressure to other providers coming from outside Europe or not complying with our own rules? How we can ensure that our startups can grow up, our solutions and services can be used? How we can ensure that adequate regulation may allow us to track what it is happening, to ensure liability, to ensure adequate management of the contents, and how we can ensure that something that is very much important in the context of the very origin of the competition rules remains truth in this context. Market power concentration, abuse of dominance, and protection of different players at the market level, but also consumers when thinking on options. So how we can build our capacity and control around digital infrastructure. Europe relies on foreign providers for over 80% of its digital products and infrastructure. US cloud providers hold over 70% of the European cloud market. Being able to track, to promote, to incentivize, and to be sure to count on the adequate regulation, including any ethical parameter and eventual possibility to challenge incumbents, will still remain a key aspect of ensuring democracy, freedom, and diversity in the way we can provide services to our citizens. We know that Europe is willing to respond. All 27 member states signed the Berlin Declaration on Digital Sovereignty in 2025. Our Invest AI initiative aims to bring in 200 billion euros for AI investment. That is the scale of ambition that we need. Later this month, we will be announcing this new tech sovereignty package, which aims to boost European production of critical chips, accelerate and scale the development of AI models in Europe, and triple our European cloud capacity. True digital sovereignty in Europe involves different aspects: building European digital public infrastructure and foundational technologies, buying European solutions and supporting our digital industries, and protecting, ensuring, working, enforcing the rules that allow the level playing field through strong enforcement of our digital and competition rules. I'm sure, as I said, that this is not an ending point for the discussion, that we still need to do lots of things. And I'm sure that we still have a long list of open questions that may be part of the discussion for the time to come. But I believe we can do it. I believe we have the right to defend the rules we want to guide our digital society to function. And the later we develop, and the less serious we stand for, the more risk we will be facing. So we must hold on to that vision. Otherwise, we risk managing decline rather than building something better. And the work ahead is difficult. It's technically complex, it's financially demanding, but it is so important. I could even call existential for democracy, for security, for the creation of wealth, and for the respect among human beings. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I think you raised many relevant points and a very comprehensive speech that we will, I'm sure, analyze. And now I just give the floor to the first panel, moderated by Corey Kreider, and where we will have the pleasure to listen to Christel Skaldemose, Kim van Sparentak, and Asha Allen. Thank you so much, and I leave the floor. Thank you. I just want to make the point that I like that it's not gender balanced.
What's the opposite of a manel? Thanks, Nacho. Hello, everybody. I'm Corey Crider. I'm the Executive Director of the Future of Tech Institute, and I thank ECFR and Laura Ballarin for convening us here today. Time is short. We don't know how long the lights are going to stay on, and so without further ado, I'm going to jump in. Can you still hear me here if I'm here? Yeah? Am I amplified? Excellent. So we've got a fantastic panel with us here today. We've got Christel Schaldemose, who, as everybody knows, was the rapporteur of the DSA, Kim Van Sparentak, IMCO coordinator and the shadow rapporteur of the AI Act, and Asha Allen from the Center of Democracy and Technology. Christel, if it's okay, and I know we're all late, so thank you all for your patience. It's incredible that there are so many people here today at the end of the day. I'll start with you, if I may. We've just heard some really pretty striking remarks from Teresa Ribera about what is really at stake with the enforcement of all of these digital laws, which is nothing less than our sovereignty and the enforcement power that we have over companies that, as she rightly says, have come to control our economy, our society, and our digital public square. Given your role with the DSA, I'll start with that. I mean, you know, it made global headlines when it became law, and I think citizens really hoped that suddenly we would start to see some protection for families, right? That is such an important and lingering issue. And that's why we see all the energy in member states. But you also probably know that DSA enforcement has recently become a bit of a target for bad faith actors from my, as you can hear by my accent, my birth country of the United States. Who are calling it, frankly, censorship, which is wrong, even at the same time as just this January, social media is revealed to be awash in, again, as Teresa Ribera said, AI slop and, frankly, child abuse. I noticed as recently as last week, it happened to Giorgia Meloni. I mean, nobody is safe or insulated from this stuff. We also saw last year the national security strategy, which makes pretty frank that these services, these monopolies are being weaponized against democracy. And she mentioned the bullying of the DSA-5, Thierry Breton, Josephine Ballon, and the rest on Christmas Eve with a frankly pretty muted response from the top of Europe, if I'm honest. All of this would have been pretty unthinkable, I think, even 2 years ago. And I think our collective resolve here is being tested more than in some decades. And so I just want to know if you think Europe is meeting the moments, because from the outside, it sometimes looked like pressure from the US is outranking the kind of clamor from citizens. And we hear, I mean, we heard von der Leyen's speech today about child safety, but we also read reports of the Commission potentially pumping the brakes on DSA enforcement or DMA and really hesitating to kind of reclaim control. And, you know, there's this strong polling for protecting kids online, over 80% in a social media ban. She's made this the flagship issue. So, I mean, do you see this kind of turmoil as a sign of an enforcement apparatus in trouble? Or do we just need to kind of demand stronger enforcement? And on kids in particular, given the speech today, how do we sort of make sure the energy that we all have to protect kids doesn't just dissipate, but that we open it up to kind of protect all of us with safe default settings and the rest? That's a lot, I know.
That was a lot of questions.
Yeah.
But first and foremost, thank you, Laura, for also inviting me here today. And it's great to see so many people. And it is a very important discussion. Well, first, I would like to say that, I mean, we do it in our way in Europe. And it is a slow way, but it doesn't mean in the end that it's a bad way. Because we are, in fact, sticking to the rules. So we are wanting to make sure that that the companies need to comply, but it also means that we need to make sure, maybe if you close your microphone, is that better? Yeah. So, I mean, we need to make sure that we have evidence when they're not complying, and therefore it takes some time to make the investigations. I was, at a certain time, I was worried whether the Commission would do their job, but they did. When they started the first investigation on X and ended up concluding that they were not complying with the DSA. So I think at that time I realized that they were not going to be, you know, to accept the pressure from the United States. There is clearly a pressure, but the Commission did not want to do it. So what we do from the European Parliament side is that we put a pressure on the Commission to be faster, stronger, better in the enforcement, and there's still room for improvement, I have to say. But on the other hand, we also want to say that we have a law and we need to follow that, and we need to follow rules of law, and therefore we also need to give the companies a chance to reply to the questions. So it takes time. We have now a framework in place, we have a good law in place, and then I hope that we will see even more rulings in the coming years. You also asked about protection of kids or children. and whether it's just for them or for all of us. Hopefully for all of us in the end, we need to protect our democracy. We need to protect everyone. But in the political climate we have right now, I think that starting with minors is a good place to start. And definitely we need to do more. And I'm really happy that Laura and I and others in IMCO also have tried to with the initiative report we made, we have sent a clear signal that we want an age limit. We want age verification. We need, of course, to find the right balance. But I was happy to hear what Ursula von der Leyen said today in Copenhagen, that she wants to deliver something on that at summertime. And we can also see around Europe that the member states, they have also already announced, several of them, that that they want to have an age limit and age verification. France start 1st of September. So in case the EU is not doing anything, we will still have a fragmented internal market. So, but that could lead to, one is age verification and age limits harmonized at EU, but we also need to tackle the design, and here Kim has played a very crucial role in the last mandate. We need to do something about addictive design. And on that, I think it will have an impact positively on every one of us, because if we start making sure that, I do it myself. I'm embarrassed in the evenings when I'm tired. I open Instagram and I shouldn't do it, and then suddenly I've spent an hour just scrolling. So even I become addicted, and I am so ashamed of it, because I should never ever open that app anyway, because I know what they're doing. They're stealing my data. But anyway, maybe what we can do is to help by having a pressure on the Commission, making sure that they do something for kids, that they push and use the DSA, because already in there we have things that you're not allowed to have systemic risks when it comes to, for instance, public health, and being addicted is certainly a public health issue. So sorry for the long speech. We can use the DSA. It's the best we have right now, and making it even better, even though I could maybe personally think that it could be worth doing it. I don't believe that it is possible in this mandate, in this situation we have in the European Parliament, because then you will start hear even more people screaming about censorship. DSA is not censorship.
Thank you very much. Kim, I'm going to go to you. I mean, you have done a huge amount to kind of promote the child safety issue, of course, and she mentioned the part about kind of addictive design and default settings. And it was good that von der Leyen mentions the DFA kind of alongside this idea of kind of a kind of delay, as she put it, for children in European legislation. How do you see those two things fitting together? And then I realize this is a bit left field, because none of you, well, no, you sit on IMCO, so maybe I can ask a DMA question as well. But, she mentions the DMA in passing, I guess, in that speech, but she doesn't really tie those two things together. She doesn't, it's almost as if it seems to think of it as a business tool, but not as a child safety tool. But when I speak to the people at Eurosky or Blue Sky who are building these alternative services, they need to be able to attract investment, and they need to be able to attract other users. And when something like the Grok scandal breaks, and I phone MEPs who are still on it, or reporters, and I say, how about now? Right? If we weren't going to move off it when it was systematically promoting far-right views, maybe we can move because it is the child abuse app now. They say, yeah, but news breaks here, or my followers are here. And, and so people are stuck. The lock-in is real. So I guess I'm interested to know whether you think, we haven't, like, interoperability, sorry, ugly 8-syllable word. I really try. I want another word for it. But, the building people an escape slide is incredibly popular. People want European social media. They want to stop doom scrolling, the way that Christelle was honest to say, and I've certainly caught myself doing as well. Like, people want this escape slide, but we haven't put it in. Mm-hmm. So what more can we do? What more do you want to see kind of in the next little while prioritized by this commission to make child safety and, frankly, safety for the rest of us a reality?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think, when we're talking about digital sovereignty as the umbrella, there's a lot of things we should do in terms of investing. Right now, more than 250 billion euros a year is spent on American tech. So that creates millions of jobs in the United States. And meanwhile, everyone is complaining that we can't do anything in the EU because of laws. I think there's also an economic story about this. This is why maybe I am a bit tired, because I've been trying to save the AI Act in the last weeks from being destroyed in an AI omnibus, which unfortunately is clearly put forward because of pressure from the United States on our AI law. I really hope that that this is one of the last things that will budge, but I'm very worried seeing what is coming out of that, and how also even member states are jumping on that to see if they can deregulate just for their industry. However, on your question, yes, I think there's a lot of things that are very connected here. And I worked indeed a lot on addictive design. And I think when we are talking about making sure that we have a safe, robust, European, pro-democratic digital landscape, we have to really look at all these different things. So as soon as I hear, for example, DMA competition policy, suddenly this little balloon going up in the air with the idea, should we lighten competition policy? I just hear Peter Thiel screaming in the back of some room saying, yes, we only want monopolies because that's better. The Thielism is coming to Europe. And I think we have to be really, really wary about it, that this is all connected. And indeed, that this network effect that everyone has, which is the effect that indeed so many people are using certain platforms. And that's the reason, I'm still on WhatsApp because my parents don't want to move to Signal, that kind of story. That is something we really have to do something about. Same goes for social media. I think it's absolutely absurd that so much, for example, government communication is put out on social media, for which you have to get an account with a platform that is fundamentally wrong. So these are things that we really have to change and see how we can indeed way more clearly foster the laws that we have. And when it comes to interoperability, indeed, ugly word, but basically making sure that there's the technical connection for you to do that. I mean, we even tried in the DSA, we had an idea to create interoperable social media, because what we managed, of course, in the DMA is to try to connect messaging apps. That's a nice start. But actually social media and really choosing for yourself what you want to see, where you want to be on, and also what kind of information you can access. And I think by becoming, making the debate only about how can we join the rat race on AI, making the debate about, going forward with that, building more and more cloud, we are suddenly in a race running towards something that I'm still not sure what it is. I think it is incredibly important that we actually then have some sort of strategy where we actually say, okay, we are moving towards a Europe where we have great companies that are here and fundamentally to our values, to our laws, that are open source, that are privacy friendly, and that are actually creating the tech of the future. And for me, the tech of the future isn't made by those ideologists from Silicon Valley who think that making us more addicted to social media, making us more addicted to chatbots is innovation. For me, innovation is making sure that everyone can thrive, making sure that companies can thrive, people can thrive, we are connected, that the right to proper and decent information is actually ingrained in. And that is what I'm trying to fight for. And then when it comes to the DFA, I think it is very important that, this idea of trying to combat addictive design came from many different angles. We came from the democracy perspective, because we know that the more addictive the algorithm is, the more disinformation is spread faster. It came indeed from the effects we're seeing on youngsters, but actually the effects we're seeing on all of us when it comes to addiction of social media apps. And that's why we also said we want a right not to be disturbed horizontally. And it is actually absurd to think that that was seen as something radical, because what this proposal means is that when you buy or download an app or buy a phone, it is not hyper addictive by default. And that should be the standard for almost every other product. We say it cannot be dangerous. It cannot be unhealthy. for digital products, for some reason, we have accepted that is the standard. And that is what we need to change. And that is what I hope we can achieve in the Digital Fairness Act. And indeed, the momentum, people talking about kids, is very positive. But what I'm seeing is that those kids are fighting back now and saying, I'm sorry, but I think my parents are worse than me. And now we have to make sure those kids are also being heard, and we're just banning addictive design for everyone.
Thank you. I did see a joke from, I think, somebody in Germany saying, if we're honest, shouldn't we be banning social media for the over 50s? I thought that was actually ageist. I just want to say, I think the fair point is that the problem we have is everyone. I also want to salute you for calling out what sometimes feels like a bit of AI FOMO over on this side of the sea, when, let's tell the truth, the burn rate, AI does not yet make money, guys. The burn rate of these companies is in the billions per year, right? Cloud makes money. It has 40% profit margins. And so actually liberating our kind of cloud market so that local competitors can do something different and build something else, not another Grok, feels like a good idea. Asha, I want to go over to you. Now, CDT obviously works transatlantically. And so I think you probably have quite a privileged, or I don't know if you would call it privileged, perspective on this kind of transatlantic dimension. And I wonder what you think when if you see a kind of hesitation out of the Brussels apparatus and kind of making these laws meet their promise. And also, I suppose, I mean, you've seen some of your fellow colleagues in civil society really come under quite a lot of bullying, right? Should we all be kind of cowing before what's happening in the United States? Or I don't know, is it a paper tiger? We saw Donald Trump did, again, say he was going to raise tariffs on the automobile, which I'm imagine is weighing heavily on some European politicians' minds. But in general, how do you see this kind of landscape and the route through? And what is civil society's role in kind of calling for stronger enforcement now?
Thank you. You can probably hear from my accent that I'm British, so I'll apologize too. It's odd being in this house in that context. So I'll start from there. But no, I think that I want to approach your question from two access points, right? And the first is a reminder to this House, to the European Commission, to European lawmakers that, placating an entity, that's the right way to think about it, placating an entity right now that is undermining its own civil liberties domestically is not going to be the methodology forward in terms of how we think about enforcing our laws. Appeasement historically has not been a methodology that has often worked and worked out well, particularly when we're thinking about this one that is quite erratic. But there's a reminder to be had here, that is the jurisdictional independence of the EU to enforce its own laws, right? The European Commission has a treaty obligation to do that. It should not be subject to the whims of political debate right now. And so it's a reminder that the European Commission, as a non-political body of the European institutions, that it is there and has a mandate in order to ensure the strong enforcement of those laws. And that can be done in consultation with those in public interest. But we shouldn't be having a discussion in which unilateral decisions are being made by the top of the European Commission to set up these kind of quiet conversations with DG Trade and the US administration on the enforcement of laws that many of us in this room have worked much of our lives, or at least the last 10 years, putting into place. So I want to kind of look at it from that perspective. We should not be having this conversation in the first place in regards to that. But then I want to highlight the possible willingness to allow that to happen. Kim very rightly mentioned the AI omnibus. We are in a very different mandate from where we were in the last mandate. This was the place of the green agenda and the digital agenda and the EU soft power and its regulatory power. And we are going to be the ones that define what digital legislation and tech policy is going to look like on the foundation of the Charter of the Fundamental Rights. And what we are seeing as civil society is a complete willingness to undermine that from this perspective of, let's just say it, securitization, isolationism. And so we are a bit concerned in regards to where that conversation is going and the willingness to allow those rules to be undermined, so that there's to fall into this kind of broader political conversation that's happening. So, of course, we're a bit concerned. But as you mentioned, we are a transatlantic organization. Our sister organization, CDT US, is much more on the front lines than we are when it comes to dealing with the Trump administration. And so I think domestically, they are also dealing with, in terms of how that is working at federal and state level, in terms of how they are approaching those kind of AI conversations. And the thing I would highlight here is the pushback against these ideas of, say, AI inevitability, and that we have to kind of absorb and assume these technologies without fundamentally questioning how they have an impact on our society. The race that we are talking about right now should not be grounded on catch-up, but should be about reimagining, right? We are fundamentally here because we understand that we needed to put policies in place to mitigate the harms that these technologies or platforms have conducted to societies. I sit here as now a Belgian, the Brit, after what happens in my own country. But I think we need to fundamentally reshift that conversation and what we're talking about into what do we mean by digital sovereignty or EU sovereignty on the basis of our values and our rules, right? This should not be a place of catch up. It should be a place of reimagining. So then to come to the second part of your question on civil society, I think fundamentally it has been a grave disappointment that we have not had commentary from the European Commission, in some cases not even from heads of member states, on the targeted actions by the US administration towards civil society organizations working on issues like the Digital Services Act or the AI Act. It should be a grave concern that state machinery is being used to chill civil society organizations. A healthy, thriving civic space is a key marker and indicator of a healthy democracy. And so when they are attacking those civil society organizations, they are in fact attacking that democratic infrastructure. And so by not saying anything, that is, again, another form of appeasement. And in the midst of those conversations, civil society are often the ones with the extensive expertise. We've been focused on this for years. This has been the heart and soul of what we've dedicated our careers to. We're the experts in the rooms, but we are the ones with the least power when we're in those rooms and the ones who need the backing when these certain situations happen. Now, I want to make a clear differentiation between different elements of what's been happening. We've had some great support from here in the European Parliament. There are elements in DG Connect, for example, that have been there's a statement from the Board of Digital Services that when civil society was attacked, they put out a statement in support of civil society organizations, but unless you know who the Board of Digital Services is and know where their website is, you did not know that that happened, right? So I think it's a grave form of appeasement that nothing was said in regards to that. And that also ties into the restriction of funding that's happening for civil society organizations. One of the first things that the administration did was to just cut enormous amounts of funding across the entire civic spectrum. And so people are really feeling the crunch when it comes to not only is the work that we're doing being infringed upon, but that our capacity to be able to do that work is also being infringed upon. So the last thing I'd say, I want to tie it to what you mentioned on the national security strategy that I think people should have been very scared of when they saw. It was a very clear, open declaration of what they intended to do. And I think we need to be very clear in our responses to this and understand that how we protect civil society in this space is a marker of how we should be moving forward.
Thank you very much. Christelle, quick ones over to you. Just on that funding point, given that civil society organizations are doing a lot of the kind of technical work to support some of this DSA enforcement, and given that we're in the kind of MFF process, would you like to see a little bit more sustainable process opened up there for funding of civil society? And then you mentioned something about the relationship between member states and their own national legislative processes and what's going on here in Europe, right? And so, I mean, what would you say to the Spanish, to the French, to the Germans who are, responding to real democratic pressure with their own statutes? Would you tell them to park it or to keep going in parallel, just in case something doesn't work out here?
First and foremost, the MFF, it's difficult, and I understand the need and the wish for more money. Everybody wants that. It's difficult times. I think that, we need to support our democracy in many, many, many ways. Funding is of course a part of it, but it's not the only one. It's also supporting them in terms of, making sure that they have access, that they access to data via the DSA, for instance, et cetera, trusted flaggers, etc. I think, yeah, but we never ever have enough money. I just want to say that, and it's difficult. Anyway, I do believe that we need, of course, to support civil society. So what I find very interesting and very good right now is that, in fact, it is the member states who are pushing for more in order to protect minors. If it wasn't for the member states, nothing would have happened. Ursula von der Leyen would not have talked about it at all. We would not have seen any progress on it. So I think it's the Spanish government, it's the Danish government, it's the French government, etc. So right now they are demanding on behalf of their citizens that we need to do something to protect citizens and children in particular. And yes, in the ideal society, in the ideal world, but we don't have that right now, we would of course have looked at how we could do things better in terms of content and see how we could, protect kids from certain parts of content and let them be there online for others. But we are not in that ideal world. We don't have tech giants who are working together with us. We're trying to deliver. On the contrary, they are harvesting whatever it takes. It's like the tobacco industry, delay, so that they can earn money as much as possible. And that's why I think that the call from the member states are quite good, because if they didn't call for that, and if we haven't seen, France and others moving already moving on to do something in terms of an age limit and a verification, nothing would really have happened. So I'm happy for that, and I have been a little bit worried for the expert panel that Ursula von der Leyen has been put down, because it's been slow. She announced it back in September last year, and it's just started to work. But now suddenly I feel that things are happening, and I'm happy for that, because that is a reaction to what we're seeing online. We are desperate in order to find ways to protect our kids. And if we should do it content-wise, it would last even more years. And we don't have the time, and we don't have the capacity, and we don't have the cooperation from the platform. So I just want to say that politically right now, I think that those who really moved has been the member states, and I'm happy for that. But all sorts of questions can be raised about how to do it, and privacy preserving, etc., and is it the right thing when we want kids to become digital, etc. I understand all these questions, but right now our kids are faced with a lot of problematic things online, and we know, Danish kids, 94% have an account on social media at the age of 10. 94%. So asking the parents to do something, asking all the platforms to do something to protect them from parts of the content. Well, yes, in the ideal world, but as I said, we're not there. So I think that what happens right now is in fact a push from member states. I also want to say that a lot of civil society organizations started also wanting to have the ideal solution, but I've seen in several member states that they have also moved and wanting to say that it's not a silver bullet, but a faster way to start protecting is to make sure that platforms will do something. Unfortunately, I have to leave now. We're a little bit delayed, but I just want to say that to end this, we have the DSA, it's a good law, and let's make sure that we put a pressure on the Commission to enforce it in a stronger manner than they're doing today. There are still things we can do. We need to put a pressure, and probably, that's the best we can do right now in this climate, and then hope that we will see more actions also in terms of addictive design, because I do believe that that's important. In the beginning, maybe we can only do it when it's about kids, but hopefully we can all be better protected in the future. Thank you very much, Laura, for inviting me here today. Thank you, everyone.
Christelle, thank you for being here. Just super briefly so that we can move on to the next panel. Asha, I know you had your finger up. I want to give you both the chance. I mean, maybe we'll do you, Asha, first, given you put your finger up, but to give a brief kind of concluding remark there, just super briefly.
Sure, I'll try and be quick, but I wanted to kind of respond to some of the reflections here. So one, I will start on the protection of minors, and I don't know about any of you in the room, but I'm not a young person. I vividly remember the 90s, so I don't think I can be counted as a young person, and I don't think we should be having these conversations without them in the room, right? We just to kind of lend from our friends over at the European Disability Forum, nothing about us without us. We should not be having conversations about putting elements in place without having that detailed consultation with the groups who are going to be most impacted by this. And children, young people are not a monolith, just like women are not a monolith. And so there are very different considerations that we need to put in place. I don't think civil society are in disagreement at all that we need to do something fundamentally about the dangers that these platforms pose to our societies. I think we could, if you look at that from the gender perspective or look at it from a democratic perspective, we still have companies who are basically marking their own homework and telling us this is the best that we can do, and therefore your solution needs to be something that is restrictive and puts the onus on young people to be banned from these particular spaces. And so I just want to say there's no way to do that technically or in a policy way that isn't going to undermine rights in some other way for some other group. So the headline there would be, it's in moments like this, of moments like crisis, of moments like deep, deep concern, where we actually have to put our efforts into upholding the balancing of rights more rather than undermining rights in any other way. So I just wanted to lend that to the conversation. The last thing I want to say is that as we mature this conversation on digital sovereignty, I would highly encourage you to think about what that means in this context, right? Sovereignty means very different things to very different people. And in Europe, that can mean very positive things, but that can also mean very negative things, depending on the groups that you may belong to. So as we're thinking about what that terminology means and what we're trying to capture with that, I highly, highly encourage us to do that on the basis of what the Charter of Fundamental Rights aimed to do. Not all of us have had the privilege of being able to enjoy those rights under the Charter, but if we are truly going to drive ourselves forward and thinking about digital sovereignty in that context, then it has to be on the basis not only of the Charter, but international human rights as well.
The phrase I really like is self-determination, which is another way of putting it. Kim, back over to you. And also there's a huge amount of sovereignty washing now. I mean, every tech monopoly's got a sovereign cloud service, which isn't, don't they? Very, very briefly, so we can move on to the next. Take us home. If you could have one thing, what do you want?
Okay, I had two, so I'm gonna take it. So first of all, on civil society, I mean, I'm terrified right now that we are in a world where we see that every single NGO, whether they're national or European, have to cut back on staff. And the most brilliant people with the most brilliant ideas and the most knowledge out of all of us, we can't do our work without you all, are just being pushed aside because the funding has stopped. Meanwhile, in the European Parliament, if you try to invite an NGO onto a panel, it is blocked by the right wing of the House. We see all this, from the European Commission, all these campaigns on democracy worth to protect. Really, really hope they're going to put their money where their mouth is when it comes to the new MFF. And when it comes to just go back to AI one more time, I think what is the most important thing we realize about AI is that big tech has perfected how to, bombard us with beautiful stories, pretend like they're going to save the world. They've gotten even better at burning money. And they've gotten even better at making sure that people get locked into the service. And that is what we have to be aware of when we're talking about AI. And what I think is incredibly important is that, we take what they say with a grain of salt, but also make sure that we are listening to the things that we should be worried about. I mean, we had a debate last week in the Internal Market Committee about mythos. And we asked the European Commission, so what's up? Are we in danger? Is it going to be bad in terms of cybersecurity? Are we all going to be hacked? Are our banks going to be hacked? What's the deal? And the Commission said, well, but we have legislation on cybersecurity. And if that's implemented well, actually, there can't be any security breaches. So there shouldn't be a problem. This is not what I want to see as a response to AI. Even if what Anthropic says is half true, and even if what all these other AI companies are claiming to be able to do in terms of cybersecurity is half true, we are in trouble. And I want the European Commission to take action and not one that says, oh, well, regulating AI, meh, is that even that important? So that's my call for you all.
Thank you all. Thanks to the panelists. And let's go on to the anchor final panel. Thanks.
Okay, hello everyone. Feels like a bit of a speed dating here, the speed we're moving. So now on to our next and last panel. I want to thank, of course, everyone, this great audience for being here today. Of course, Laura and the EP and the team, Victor and Laura for helping organize this, also for ECFR team as well. Chiara, thank you for this. And of course to the great speakers that we have here today. I come from European Council on Foreign Relations. This is a foreign policy and security think tank. Sometimes, we get the question that what is a think tank like you doing in a place like this when we're discussing, child protections and all these things. But of course, as Laura said in her introduction, and also EVP Ribera and the speakers which spoke before, we face a democracy issue and in many respects, the national security and European security issue on the top of that, of course, of an economic security issue. So we miss that sometimes we need to use a bit more the language of national and economic security when we discuss these issues, and that, it is okay to build shields, but shields are necessary but not sufficient conditions. If you just use a shield, you're not protecting yourself. You need to use a sword sometimes and to try and understand how the dynamic works. Also, we know that mitigation, it's okay as a strategy, but it may fail, as it was said, as someone said before, as Kim said before, if your adversary reads it as restraint. We need deterrence. We need to build deterrence and to build a deterrence package which shields us, but also give us the opportunity. If you allow me, where is our Strait of Hormuz? When we look at digital fields, we feel like helpless and defenseless, but we're not. And this is where we have to think through. And we have to even think on retaliation, as we said, with the bans on EU officials and civil society. How is it that we are not able to use these things? So, on the top of that, of course, we need the instruments, the strategies, and the coalitions. This second panel, I think, it's, comes very nicely after the discussion we had before. It is about what comes next. Some of these things were already discussed and introduced in the previous panel, but, we discussed digital sovereignty, but we discussed also how to imagine a better future. Are we condemned to live in this reality, which is sometimes, not sometimes, most of the time, so sad? How is it that, we can survive or not to what someone has called the weaponization of the Draghi report against the European Union? And sometimes, as we discussed last year, how are we thrown under the omnibus, with our rules and so on, and makes ourselves even more vulnerable. For that, I have Sandro Gozzi, whom, as you know, as member of the European Parliament for Renew, Vera France, founder and executive director of the Economic Democracy Project, and Martin Huling, from the director from the Bertelsmann Institute Network for Technological Sovereignty and Resilience. So, if I may start with you, Sandro, because you're known for your very firm positions on defending Europe and democracy and the digital regulations from this coercion arising from US government and its combination with US big tech. We've seen these threats play time and again, including sanctions, as we said, as EU officials, but also institutions which we very much hold for, like ICC, and the use of platforms like X to interfere in electoral campaigns on Europe. So, so how, before we speak of digital sovereignty in the long term, how ready are we to withstand these pressures? What can we do that we are not doing? What is your assessment on these strategies of mitigation or deterrence? How can we do better in deterring coercion from falling into us and changing our legislation and our way of life? Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you, and thanks to Lara to have organized this very useful and timely debate. So thank you, and thank you all that you are still here, even if it's getting late. So I will try to be short and very straight to the point. We are witnessing a deliberate convergence between geopolitical pressure and technological power or technological oligopolies. So we are really under pressure. There are sanctions against the EU officials. They should, as I said also in the plenary, they should sanction us all, because we were 529 to have voted for the DSA. They should sanction 27 former members of the Commission and some which are still members of the new Commission, because the Commission decided by collegiality, so it wasn't only Thierry Breton's job. So I mean, this is the situation we are facing. It is technological and political coercion, and I think that we are responding in a two-week way to this technological and political coercion. This is the first very clear message. Then the second message, that we have to consider the digital structure today as strategic as it is energy, telecommunication, defense. I mean, the digital issues are part of a fundamental defense strategy that we have to build up. And this is why we have to reduce our dependency. We are too dependent. There is a structural dependency of Europe on foreign cloud providers, on AI systems, on semiconductors, or online platforms. And it is clear that the more dependent we are, the more vulnerable we are. So, I mean, I think that we have to develop a new strategy of European independence. I think that we really need to work around a strategy through which the European become more independent in a much more difficult and dangerous world. That is what we have to do. And from this perspective, there are many sectors which are interested by this, but certainly one of the priority sector is certainly the sector of digital, the digital world. So I mean, so what we should do more, or what we should do better. So the second part of my answer to your question. But first of all, we should enforce more and better. That has already been said in the previous panel. But it is clear that there is more than a temptation in Brussels, within the European Commission, to follow a strategy of appeasement. A strategy of appeasement does not work, because the strategy of appeasement, the strategy that had brought the President of the European Commission to sign an impossible deal, a statement, Canterbury, which is totally imbalanced, which doesn't take into account our dependency and our deficit when it comes to digital services. It takes only manufactured goods into account. But I mean, in exchange of what? In exchange of the fact that that Canterbury deal should have brought stability and predictability. A great result. We have really got the opposite from Washington. We have got instability and we got unpredictability. And there was an issue which we have said in all the 24 languages of the European Union, that it should have been part of the Canterbury deal. And that issue was digital legislation. And in fact, everybody in Brussels and in Washington, at the European Commission and the White House, the US administration, they put lip service to this commitment, because it is clear that most of the pressure that the US administration is exercising against us is because they want us to dismantle the digital legislation. It's so clear that they have written in the national security strategy, and it is so clear that there have been instructions given by Marco Rubio to all the US ambassadors in the 27 member states to say, you have to go against the digital legislation. So Canterbury deal was a double failure. Sorry. And this is, so we have to, and even if I want to be, to be benevolent to all the answers the European Commission has given to us. Because first, the issue was, we have to be careful in enforce DSA, DMA, because the first legal case must be very solid, because you must win it. Because if we go before the Court of Justice and we lose it, the credit that I buy, as in 3 lives ago, I was a lawyer, I buy it. The first case, you must win it. Okay, but they won it. Then there was the issue of human resources. We don't have enough human resources. It's true that, I mean, these guys campaign legions of lawyers, and we had few dozen officials. Now, the human resources in the European Commission have increased. So let's say that now there are less, don't say excuses, but less reason to be cautious and to be, and still we don't see an enforcement strong enough. So I think that they are the first answer. The second answer is that we have to fill the technological gap. So, I mean, we have to strengthen a strategy and pieces of legislation and action, such as the Chip Act, supporting the development of European clouds, supporting the development of AI ecosystem, reforming the public procurement system in Europe to favor secure and trusted European solutions when it comes to digital, when it comes to cybersecurity. So we have to do this. And last point, and then I stop because I promise not to be too long. That, I mean, that also, it has been said, all the debate in Brussels now is about regulation and deregulation. For me, it's back to the 90s when I was a student in Sciences Po, and we were studying how to build up the single market. And there was a great professor, Italian, but teaching in Harvard, I think in Harvard or Yale, Gian Domenico Maione, who had written a wonderful book about deregulation and re-regulation in Europe, where it clearly said that the problem then and the problem today is not we got too much regulation in Europe. The main problem is to dismantle regulation among the 27 member states, to dismantle the national barriers. It is the national barriers who are the domestic tariffs. When the IMF or Mario Draghi tell you that we got internal tariff of equivalent of 110% when it comes to services and of 45% when it comes to manufactured goods, these are not barriers imposed by those bloody bureaucrats at the European Commission. These are the barriers imposed by the different member states that do not want a real single market of services, manufactured goods, etc. So today, the point is not that a legislation adopted 2 years ago, AI Act, is the reason why we are lagging behind. It cannot be, because we have accumulated this delay for 20 years. So the point is that we have to develop smart regulation at European level. So certainly we have to see whether there are overlapping to ensure legal certainty, etc. But the point is not deregulate at European level. It's to regulate in a smart way at European level and deregulate, dismantle the still existing barriers among the 27 member states. This is what we have to do. And it's a question of money. It's money stupid. We are lagging behind the Chinese and the Americans because we don't have a capital markets union which is effective, which functions. So it is clear that the startup, when they want to scale up, they go to search for venture capital in California. And 9 out of 10, the venture capital in California say, yes, but you come to California, you come to the United States, they stay in Europe. So the point is, the main point on which we have to strengthen the debate and we have to focus much more our attention is not the issue regulate or deregulate. It is the issue how we promote investment and innovation through building a truly European union of investment and of savings. That's the point. And I hope that we will use the part of the term behind us. We are not yet at the midterm to focus on this, because this will be the real answer to fill the gap.
Yes, as you remember, somebody call it single European Act, but it's 300 directives that were needed to create a single market, right? So yeah, you need a lot of regulation even to deregulate some things. Thank you. So, I mean, I think, Vera, I think this last point by Sandra, of course, provides a fantastic segue, because, you know, when it is about promoting innovation and new solutions that we can put in the market, you are, of course, you know, an expert on this. And I wanted to ask you, you know, we were discussing, yes, we're behind the curve. we're always, our investigations go slow, and then, remedies are not enough, and so on. So we're always, defending ourselves. But, what are your ideas in terms of how to move ahead, how to shape the market for once and all in a way that, we wouldn't have to be fixing this old thing time and again, but we could imagine like a better future. We discuss interoperability. I think it's a good word for it. Don't be ashamed of using it. Like Europeans like interoperability because they could change phone companies. They remember that those times in which they found that this was something which would increase, their welfare, or at least the freedom of choice and so on. What are those things that we could still do that would kind of turn upside down the markets rather than just correcting very imperfectly things that are already very imperfect by design? Thank you.
Thank you, Nacho, and also thank you very much to S&D for bringing us all here. I think, yes, we can definitely imagine a different future, and we can actually also build it. And I think that's why we're all here today. But first, stepping back, basically, I think today we face the consequences of 2 decades of big tech power, consolidation of that power. And these companies today, as some have said before, basically control the infrastructures we use to organize, communicate, trade, and innovate. And they have amassed, these companies, enormous economic power, but with that comes political power. And basically what we see happening is that these companies are increasingly fusing with the far right and now are weaponizing these infrastructure against democracy of itself. That is the problem. And that is what I call tech oligarchy. So to build this different future, Nacho, that you were alluding to, I think it's very important and instructive to understand how we got here, because then we can fix it and we can move forward. And basically, I believe that for the past decade, we have we were fighting downstream symptoms of big tech power. So for example, we were enforcing and still are trying to enforce better content moderation, only for, of course, Zuckerberg to fire all the fact checkers when it was politically opportune for him. And who was surprised? He owns the damn thing, right? He can do with it what he wants. So while we were busy fighting downstream symptoms, upstream, these corporations were building massive economic and political power. And that power, in one word, is infrastructure. So whoever controls it controls the terms on which our economies and democracies run. Now, that needs to end, and it needs to end and will end with a change in strategy. And I think this change in strategy is the following. Let's not ask, or let's actually stop asking big tech to wield their power differently. They won't. They're not incentivized to protect democracy. Let's reclaim some of that power. Now, the good news is that finally, I've been working on this issue for 25 years, tech sovereignty has become a political priority. And again, this is the theme of the topic, of the theme of our session today. And with that, and that is really the key thing, is the recognition, the really widespread recognition that digital infrastructure is not neutral plumbing, it is strategic terrain. So then, what do we need to do to build that alternative, different future? I think we need to do 2 things. We need to blueprint that post-monopoly future. What should it actually look like? Not just from a policy perspective, but more practically, what are the markets going to look like, etc. And then, of course, we need political will. Now, let me get practical. I thought that's possibly the best contribution. I have 3 practical suggestions. First, we must liberate social media from tech monopoly. A lot has been said about that on the first panel, so I'll keep it short. But basically, I believe while social media bans are the idea of the moment, and again, the first panel has discussed them at length, they're ultimately insufficient. They are a plaster on a gaping wound, and the bridge out of these toxic systems is, yes, interoperability. The tools exist, and we absolutely need to connect the children bans with that interoperability. But I do not think regulation is enough. So an interoperability mandate only transforms the landscape if we have actually challenger tech competitors to fill those spaces that regulation opens up. And we have these alternatives in Europe, they're growing, but what I believe is missing is an investment map to scale them. So at Economic Democracy, we're a re-grantor, we're sitting adjacent to philanthropy. We have actually started to build that map, identifying where impact, so philanthropic capital can unlock some of the co-investment from VCs and public funding. So anyone in this room interested in working together on this, we would be very excited to do so. Second, my second practical proposition, we urgently must break big tech's grip on our cloud infrastructure. Europe's cloud market is actually not a market. It's an extraction machine. Yeah. As I think Ribera has said in her opening speech, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google control 7% of that European market. But here is more. AWS collects a margin of 42%, while OVH, the European independent provider, has a margin of 12%. Again, this gap is not efficiency, in my view, it's monopoly rent. Now, how do we break that stranglehold? Of course, through aggressive antitrust enforcement. Procurement has been mentioned. We're spending 2 trillion on procurement alone on tech. But here's another, I think, really, really promising proposals. I call it the commodity solution. So drawing on the experience with the electricity liberalization, we need a European digital resource exchange. This was first proposed by Leitmotiv and intensely discussed at a recent workshop we co-hosted with European independent cloud providers. But in a nutshell, it is an open market for compute that forces providers to compete transparently in standardized and interoperable terms. It's basically vertical separation without traditional antitrust breakup. So very briefly, if I say use Notion, Notion normally relies on AWS. I'm not sure, but possibly. And so this proposal would force Notion to purchase compute on an open market. And this solution is possible with the forthcoming EU Cloud AI and Development Act. So while procurement creates demand for these alternatives, this exchange creates the space for sovereign European supply. So I think it's really worth looking into these. And these are some very practical proposals we can act right now. Third and last, I believe we must escape the AI trap. I don't think Europe lacks ambition when it comes to AI. But the problem, I think, is that Europe is trying to compete in its current industrial policy where it exists, is trying to compete with big tech on its own terms, basically chasing a resource model, ever larger language models, which favor the largest firms, deepens Europe's dependency, and it ensures even where we build our own capacities, the value flows elsewhere. So this cannot be solution. The solution instead, I think we need industrial policy, which is very explicit about where Europe can compete and where we cannot compete. If a strategy doesn't make trade-offs, it's not a strategy, it's a wish list, it's a Christmas list. And again, we need to combine that with aggressive antitrust enforcement. So to conclude, and this really builds on, I think, Sandra's point about political will. And I think here is the good news. I think we should, all of what I just said is like meaningless if Europe doesn't have the spine to act. And yes, it is a challenging current geopolitical moment, but consider this. So basically, I think Silicon Valley's valuations depend on European consumers. We're a big market. It's not the other way around. Also, Europe holds assets big tech desperately needs. So this is ASML in the Netherlands, but also size. All of these are sort of inputs into producing the chips, the sort of cutting edge chips. Nokia, Ericsson providing important mobile infrastructure. So we do hold assets. I think we're more powerful with than we let on. And also Trump's own base, let's not forget, once big tech reigned in. So I actually believe tech is Trump's Achilles heel. So basically, enforcing European laws and backing European infrastructure would not just be right. I think it could actually give Europe leverage in the fights over trade and security. To conclude, I think the choice before us is really stark. Europe can decide to, be more courageous and use the leverage and assets we have, or we keep writing checks to US tech oligarchs and see our democracy slowly die. Thank you, Nacho.
Thank you, Vera. I'm conscious of time, but I still want to give you good time, Martin, to go into a topic which is precisely what we are discussing, which is tech and tech sovereignty. To put it in a simplistic way, people get a bit discouraged when they learn that you need 300 billion euros and 10 years to get from A to B, and they may give up and they may say, well, we're not going to find the money, it's going to be too late. How do we resist coercion? I know you've been doing a lot of thinking on to paraphrase a paper of a good colleague of mine, Georgios Verdi, when he said, with the idea, how do you get over your ex, from how to escape American tech? How can we front load? How can we bring forward investments in any strategic way? So we just don't tell people wait 10 years, but how can we move in, like in Claude, in cutting dependencies, in identifying the things that will bring us space to breathe along this time? And I think that's maybe the question I would want you to deal with, Martin. Thank you.
Thank you, Nacho, and also thank you again for convening us today here, and also for sticking around for such a long time tonight with the manual this time around. But I hope this way we're equaling it out. So firstly, maybe to start with this, many of the points were mentioned, but I think we still have the challenge to even deal and manage to resist some of the coercion that is taking place, because we also, for now, at least throughout Europe, have limited visibility of the choke points that are actually being utilized there also, or can be utilized in the future. And this also affects us in finding this type of resilience readiness, and also then actually in a more pinpointed fashion to then play to our strengths that we have. So I think that's a monitoring and measurement challenge, especially given the 80+% dependencies according on where in the tech stack we are looking at. Of course, we have anecdotal evidence around what happened to the ICC judge, also to the kind of reactions that came out of that, but many of them are fears driven. They're not ambitious, proactive visions on where we actually would like to go. And I think that also, again, underlines this challenge of us being in a situation where maneuvering a little bit without fully having full awareness of where things are happening. But to be a bit hopeful, things are moving. I think the awareness is way greater than it was a year ago. And saying this with my heavy German accent, I also think that, there's some late movers, but that actually then double down also on a few things. So what could be done there actually to also resist this pressure in the middle term? We've talked about effective regulatory enforcement, DSA, DMA, essential, not to fall victim to the omnibuses rushing through Brussels, because it's important. But at the same time, also, credible application, let's say, of the anti-coercion instruments that we have in other areas, also the ideas that are being brought forward more and more about the screening of foreign direct investments, when those new types of data centers are being built. And let's not forget, none of this happens in a vacuum. I mean, where is the lobbying money going? It's going into, the transparency efforts around, carbon disclosure of the data centers that are there. Why do they care? It's related to the data that is extracted, at the same time also the implications around, the climate disaster that surrounds all of that. So we need to get better, I think, in seeing this, and then also using it to project our power. And I think that's also a word that I would like to bring back, I think, into the panel, but also the discussion we had here. We need to get adults about power projection that we have there. And I say this again with difficulty, coming from a country where, we've learned our lesson that this can also lead to very dark paths in this sense. But this being said, I think there are levers here. We've mentioned some of these aspects of strategic indispensability that is there. Across the global tech stack.
So sorry.
Don't you worry. And I think we have huge leverage around our market, as already was mentioned by Vera. Also the opportunity that this market not only offers to American counterparts or Chinese counterparts, but as an offer actually for collaborators that might be a little bit more value aligned as in our current situation. And also one thing that wasn't mentioned enough, I think, during the exchanges today is we also have huge leverage through our data. And again, looking at where they are going, what they are taking, part of the trade negotiations between the UK and the United States were linked also to access to NHS data. Uninterrupted, very valuable data in the health context. And yet again, this is something that is of interest to be extracted in a new type of transatlantic, triangle trade of extracting that information, annotating it for the AI systems in a horribly extractive fashion in the global south, and then to bring it to the refineries to sell it back to us. So just being aware of these aspects, I think, is critical and important. We have a few leaders, however, already that we are also observing, which are not only champions around, a more proactive stance and narrative, but it's for now also more pointed out towards red lines that are not to be crossed, right? That's also why this very big normative coherence around child protection works so well. Not only within Europe, you'd be surprised how many Indonesian counterparts are suddenly coming and also asking what Europe plans on doing there to create safe spaces. But they're not saying closing spaces, but it's creating safe spaces. Is this just possible through regulatory means, or is it an infrastructure and technological question as well? We need to be more creative there, because suddenly there's a global market for that as well. And I think it's an opportunity also to tackle. And other leaders, when looking through Europe, which is a bit scattered, France, of course, has been mentioned a few times because it has a strong narrative. There are historical reasons for that. The whole strategic autonomy thing is not something they started just last year. It's been decades, and it's also something that's culturally, of course, repeated quite a lot. We should not underestimate also Germany, that while, it's of course falling victim sometimes of false dichotomies between deregulation and innovation, there's lots of fascinating things happening behind the scenes. You just have to look at, the Sprint initiative around, scalable innovation support. We have the Sovereign Tech Fund or agency that has been creating as a template. So lots of interesting things. A player that many don't have on the radar is Switzerland. Interestingly enough, I think digital self-determination was used as an interesting term. They've been driving this for the past 10 years and also had their own experience of having to pay tribute in Washington just recently. So interesting counterparts. And between the Netherlands and ASML, classic examples, we also have Poland that not only is exposed on the Eastern Front, and I think we have to call it this way, but also has a fascinating collaboration with the Republic of Korea around defense, but also data transmissions and exchanges there. So long story short, there is leadership, but at the same time, I don't think it comes together in one overarchingly coherent, proactive, and passionate strategy that European industry and society can throw the weight behind to actually be part of something. And I think this is a political win waiting to happen. What Prime Minister Sanchez did is just one example, I think, of the opportunities that also present themselves, I think, to the political decision makers. But I think it's also a necessary case to be made actually for industry that there is actually money to be made if you're going there. And very last point I also wanted to bring here is, what areas we should then prioritize, also in line with what Vera was saying to make things more concrete. Again, going to where it hurts them most. I think embracing this whole notion that we don't need to be first to the market here in some cases, but maybe the first to be trusted, and also enabling, solutions that the market might actually be ripe for in times of unbelievable geopolitical uncertainty and volatility. Trust becomes a very, very important good in even very conservative industries around insurance, banking, finance, etc. So there's a real opportunity here. We should focus also on safeguarding our critical public services, not only around health and information, but also voting. And the whole question what this actually might mean if it breaks in the future. And one thing that wasn't mentioned too much during the panel is also the whole question around the defense dimension and the energy security that we have, because that remains a highly digitized ecosystem as well. And everything we've been talking about here is of high importance, but I think those are also those where there might be some alignment of different political players also to come here. So to finish, echoing what was said before by the colleague from CDT also, this is not about a narrative of catching up, neither in the AI race, where the rules are, stacked against us for sure. But it's also not just only about reimagining, but this is about enforcing our own agency that we should have, the self-determination that I mentioned to before, and to play to our strengths and to our values, and at the same time also see what type of competitive opportunities might be lying therein. And this can only happen through a collective action that needs to be linked to a very clear narrative and vision, where I think we are still waiting for the real leaders and champions then to push this forward so that we can all jump on board and take part in it.
Thank you, Martin. As it gets late even for Spanish standards, I'm going to give Sandro a final word, precisely on the point, of defense and the points made by the panel. Probably my favorite piece of legislation that we could dream of is what the Americans use to for TikTok, is protecting Americans from foreign adversely controlled applications. Can we think of protecting Europeans from foreign adversely controlled applications? Don't answer to that.
No, I mean, I agree. I mean, I agree with what has been said. It has been, very complimentary. Yes, we have a strength and the weight. It is a European market. We must show that we are ready to exercise this power, to develop a model, an approach, a strategy, which I called of European independence, to AI and to digital issues, which is a third way between what we see of the two models that we have in the world, which is the American model, where the big tech set the tone and decided everything, and send the text that then Jim Jordan or other brilliant people from the Congress, the White House, they send us with the seal of the White House or the Congress to us, but it's all written by the big tech. So the model where the big tech decide everything, and the model where there are rules, and it's not true that the rules prevent innovation, because in Chinese model, it got rules, strong rules, very heavy rules, decided by the Communist Party, which didn't prevent Chinese from being the leader today in several aspects of AI innovation. So I think that if we want to exercise power, we have also to get rid of this layer of fake debate, which is there just to block and to prevent Europe from really exercise power. Then, to last point, there is a competition. I mean, it's very nice what you say, but we are in a competition. We have to see whether we can, in this new phase, because, I mean, after all, take the AI model. I mean, the long term on AI model is 2 years, 2-3 years. That's the very long term. So, I mean, we have the time to win races, because every 3 years, it is a century concerning AI. But it is clear that if we want to win this race, we have to do it. We have to reduce our economic fragmentation. We have to dismantle the national barriers. We have developed capital markets which are underdeveloped. We have to reduce our our dependence on foreign technologies, and we have to reduce our dependence on non-European values chains. This is called the industry policy of the 21st century. We have to develop an industry policy of the 21st century to do this. And the other point, very last point, is yes, we have to develop transnational alliances. There are like-minded actors around the world, which can be Canada, which can be South Korea, which can be Japan, which can be Vietnam. We paid a visit to Vietnam 1 year ago. They are developing, they share many of the concerns that we have addressed in the Digital Service Act. I mean, I would then say an example of democracy. There are like-minded actors around the world. I think that we can take the leadership of this. Thank you.
Okay, so we can bring the panel to an end almost in time. So I think Corey may remind you, what do you teach to American children when they encounter a bear? What is it like when it's brown, lay down, when it's black, fight back, right? So let's hope we identify the bear rightly and we can put a fight. Thank you so much to everyone. Thank you.